All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're looking at, well, a lot. It's almost like a real-time snapshot of global tensions. We've got excerpts from a Spanish-language news broadcast from December 2019. It's like rapid-fire headlines mixed with some deeper commentary.
Yeah, and what makes a source like this so fascinating is that it lets us see connections, not just isolated events, but how they fit into a bigger picture.
Exactly. We're piecing together a puzzle here, and some of the pieces we're dealing with today. Russia, Ukraine, the 2020 U.S. election, NATO, even a bit of internal political drama. And just to be clear, while the sources are in Spanish, the content has worldwide relevance. These themes, they're universal.
Absolutely. Power struggles, economic anxieties, whispers of conflict. It affects all of us, no matter where we are.
Okay, so let's jump right in, starting with, well, Russia. This broadcast captures Putin responding to, at the time, presidential candidate Donald Trump. Specifically, Trump's threats about tariffs on BRICS nations. And Putin doesn't hold back, calling the U.S. dollar a, quote, political weapon.
Yeah, it's a powerful statement for sure, and it really gets to the core of the global financial system. See, BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It's a group of major economies, and they're challenging, the traditional Western-dominated order.
So Trump's tariff threats, they were like trying to hold on to U.S. economic power. But Putin saw it as, what, a declaration of economic war.
Exactly. It was about dominance, and Putin calling out the weaponization of the dollar. That resonates with a lot of nations. They rely on the dollar, sure, but they also, resent it.
A classic dilemma, right? Dependence versus wanting control.
Exactly. And this tension, it's fueling so much of what we're seeing on the geopolitical stage, not just with Russia, but globally.
And it's not just talk, right? We also hear about a Russian ship firing warning shots at a German helicopter in the Baltic Sea. Not exactly a friendly wave.
Definitely not. And that incident, combined with, we hear about it later, a damaged undersea cable in the same area, raises questions. Are these isolated incidents or something more deliberate? The Baltic Sea. It's a crucial strategic point. Any disruption there has major ripple effects.
So things are already tense. Then Russia calls for a UN Security Council meeting. And their accusation that the U.S. is fabricating stories about kidnapped Ukrainian children. It's a whole other battlefield, this one fought with information.
It's classic information warfare. Denial, counter-accusations, carefully crafted narratives. It's all about shaping perception, about who controls the narrative.
Control seems to be a theme here, because next up, Russia expressing deep concern over Ukraine potentially receiving long-range Taurus missiles from Germany.
And these aren't just any missiles. We're talking air-launched, a range of over 500 kilometers. They're known for their precision and their ability to, evade defenses. For Russia, the idea that Ukraine could strike deep inside their territory, that's a major threat.
Makes sense why they push back against that. But then Germany's caught in a tough spot. They want to support Ukraine, but also, not provoke Russia.
It's a high-stakes balancing act.
Yeah.
How do you support a nation's right to defend itself without risking a larger war? There are no easy answers.
It's like every move on the board has these huge consequences, and no one can predict what will happen next.
That's the thing about a system this complex, right? It's all connected. And that point really hits home in this next part. Jens Stoltenberg, he was NATO's Secretary General at the time, he issues this serious warning about Russian nuclear technology potentially ending up in North Korea.
Okay, yeah, that definitely ups the ante. We're not talking just regional tensions anymore. This is global.
Absolutely. North Korea's nuclear ambitions, they've been a global concern for decades if they were to get help from Russia, which has, let's be honest, very advanced nuclear tech that could completely destabilize the region, could even trigger a nuclear arms race.
And we can't forget the backdrop here, right?
Yeah.
The 2020 U.S. election. Remember, this broadcast is from December 2019. So the race is heating up and the whole world's watching, wondering who the next U.S. president will be.
And that uncertainty, it just adds another layer of complexity to everything. Different candidates mean different foreign policy, different alliances, different ways of dealing with countries like Russia, China, North Korea. The election's outcome, huge impact on global stability.
Speaking of global stability, this broadcast also catches NATO trying to figure out how to adapt to new threats. They're talking about setting up this maritime drone fleet to protect infrastructure in the Baltic and Mediterranean seas.
Basically, they want to create this underwater surveillance network. The broadcast actually uses the phrase camera on every street corner, but underwater. It's about deterring sabotage, protecting those vital shipping lanes, pipelines, communication cables, the whole deal.
It sounds a bit, Orwellian.
Oh.
But I guess it makes sense given the tension and how vulnerable underwater infrastructure is these days.
It's a sign of the times, for sure. That clear line between peace and conflict, it's getting blurrier. And what we think of as warfare, it's changing. Cyber attacks, information warfare, sabotage, they're all just as important as traditional military action.
And just to make sure everyone understands they're serious, we hear then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He gives this blunt message to Putin: attack one NATO member, and you attack them all.
He's basically laying out Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, which is like the foundation of their collective defense idea. It's a huge deterrent because it means an attack on one is an attack on everyone, triggers a unified response.
Like a big flashing neon sign saying, don't even try it. But even with that in place, there's still so much room for miscalculation, for escalation, especially when information's weaponized and narratives are manipulated like this.
And that's why it's crucial to understand the context, the history, all the different sides of the story. It's easy to get caught up in the headlines, the immediate crisis. But we need to zoom out, see the whole picture.
Okay, so we've got Russia flexing its muscles, the U.S. election shaking things up, NATO scrambling to adapt. But there are a few more interesting pieces to this global puzzle.
And these seemingly unrelated events, when you look at them together, they start to form a pattern, a world dealing with huge shifts in power, technology, ideology, like each story is a brushstroke. And as we add them, a more complex picture emerges.
So let's start with Trump appointing Peter Navarro as a trade advisor. Navarro, he's known for his tough stance on China and his, well, pro-protectionist policies.
That appointment, it signaled that Trump's America First agenda was here to stay. Putting domestic economic interests first, challenging those traditional free trade ideas. It was a major change for U.S. economic policy, and it had a big impact on global trade.
Then there's the political turmoil in South Korea. The president declares martial law. Really highlights how fragile political systems can be, even in established democracies.
You're right. Internal divisions, economic pressures, threats from outside, they can destabilize even the strongest systems. It reminds us that political stability isn't a guarantee. Things can change quickly, unexpectedly.
And on that note of unexpected events, we hear Serbia's president warning about Putin's nuclear threats, saying Putin wouldn't hesitate to use them if Russia's security was at stake.
That statement, it really underlines the anxieties about nuclear conflict that still exist, even decades after the Cold War. It also shows the complicated relationship between Russia and Serbia, two countries with shared history, shared interests that often end up, opposing the West.
And to wrap up this world tour of hotspots, we hear about the U.S. launching its first Space Force unit in Japan.
That was a big deal. It marked a new era of military competition, but in space. Setting up that Space Force unit in Japan, a key U.S. ally in the Asia-Pacific, that was clearly meant to counter what China and Russia are doing in space, militarily speaking.
So we've gone from land to sea to air, now we're battling in space. The potential for conflict is just expanding rapidly.
And it's a reminder that the world never stops changing. The challenges we face, they're becoming more complex, more interconnected. To deal with it, we need to think critically, stay informed, and be willing to question what we think we know.
Feels like we've gotten a preview of the next decade, and, well, it doesn't look all that peaceful.
Yeah, it's a bit of a reality check. Progress isn't always a straight line. We can have moments of calm, and then boom, everything shifts.
But in the middle of all this geopolitical drama, there's this story about Ukraine. They're developing a new weapon, a drone missile hybrid called Palianitsia. And even the name is interesting.
Right. Palianitsia, it's this bread in Ukrainian culture, often shared as like a gesture of welcome. But during the conflict with Russia, it became a way to tell Ukrainians from Russians because the word, it's hard for Russian speakers to say correctly. So the weapon's name, it's not just a name, it's a symbol of Ukrainian identity, their resistance.
Taking something ordinary, something about hospitality, and turning it into a tool of defiance.
It shows the resilience of people, how they resist, even in the darkest times. And it reminds us that even with these global power struggles going on, individual acts of courage, creativity, they can make a difference.
So we've covered a lot. Trade wars, the threat of nuclear weapons spreading, political instability, even weaponizing space.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in. What would you say is the biggest takeaway from all of this?
I think it's how connected everything is. Something that seems isolated, happening in one part of the world, can have these ripple effects, ones we don't even see coming. It means we can't afford to be passive. We can't think that what happens somewhere else doesn't affect us.
It's like a call to action. reminding us that we all have a part to play in shaping the future, whether it's staying informed, talking to each other, or pushing for policies that, promote peace and understanding.
Absolutely. In a world this complex, this interconnected, the choices we make, even the small ones, they matter. They have consequences. And if we understand what's going on, we can hopefully deal with the challenges and, build a better world, a more just world, a world that's, well, sustainable.
That's a good point to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been, well, a bit of a wild ride, but hopefully we've all learned something. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.